To suggest that God has to forgive is to imply that he has flaws. To suggest that he can't forgive without the shedding of blood implies that he has not just some flaws, but he has major flaws, and he has a lot of mental issues. Anyone who requires someone to die so he can forgive another is crazy. Forgiveness is a concept.
Hi, and welcome to Inspiring Honesty. I'm your host, Greg Brahe, and I'm an atheist. Today I'll be joined by Bob Greaves, my regular guest host, and we do not have an additional guest on this week because we really wanted to focus on, I guess we've covered a lot of information and had a lot of long interviews with guests that have brought up some very complicated topics, and we wanted to give the opportunity to the viewer to send in their questions, their comments, anything that they've thought and we didn't have the opportunity to talk to, and sort of just rehash what we have covered a bit. Now, obviously, we've covered quite a bit, and there's a good chance that we're just going to brush the surface this week, but that's what I love about having people on this show for, is that Bob and I now have conversation fodder for months. So it's exciting to have this opportunity. Next week, we will have a guest on the show again, a fellow biologist that I'm excited about, Mr. Mike Shaw, and we'll be talking about tardigrades. It's interesting to look up ahead of time if you have the opportunity. These are otherwise known as water bears and can live basically infinitely, even in space. They're interesting organisms, so it'll be a fun show. But right now I wanted to bring Bob Greaves back onto the show. Bob, how are you?
I'm doing fine. I think I've had a tough weekend in some ways and an awesome weekend in others. So I'm very confused, but I'm feeling good.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I'm not sure where to go with that, but I too had an interesting weekend. I did want to touch base on this a little bit for the show, because I attended a wedding yesterday, and it was in Chicago. It's about 3 hours away from where I live. And it was fantastic. Had a great time. A friend of mine from high school got married, and it was the first same-sex marriage that I've attended.
Oh, really?
And it was fantastic. It was just such a beautiful ceremony, and the homily, the things that were discussed. It was in an ELCA, or Evangelical Lutheran Churches in America, is I think what that stands for. So that particular synod of or branch of the Lutheran Church hosted this, and it was just such an incredible experience, and I'm so happy to be a part of this generation where things like this are more commonplace and not. I don't know. It was also an interracial marriage, and that didn't even get talked about, which is, it goes to show the difference that's happened as well. So that was my weekend. But that may be a topic for another show entirely. I don't want it, but it was exciting. I wanted to share the world and say congratulations to Benny and Katie, who were the couple of honor this weekend. So they're probably not watching. They're off to their honeymoon now. But either way, the show was recorded. So congratulations, you guys. So, I don't know where to start, Bob.
Well, we've been through so much here. We got started, and in many ways, I think it's been. I've enjoyed getting to know you through the show. When we first got started, that first show, we'd barely even spoken with each other at all. We just were getting to know each other, and I would say that your first two shows were probably ones where we're still trying to figure things out, or what's our what's the setting here, and what have you. And I think we had to do some of that before we were then able to then take on other guests and have a sense of how that would work, because we would both be coming at that guest from slightly different points of view, in some ways radically different points of view, in other ways identical points of view. So we had to get some sort of I think a perspective on that. So we've been here, since August 12th, right?
Yes. Yep. That was the first show. So we are now over 2 months into the show. I think this is,
1, 2,
I used to number them and I forget now.
4,
but
5, 6, 7, 8. Wow.
Is this our 10th
9,
anniversary
10, 11,
show?
12.
Is that where we're at?
This is our 12th Sunday show. Yeah.
Is it? Wow, 12.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
we've been adding them up.
hey, and we've had some fantastic guests. I wanted to take the opportunity to say thank you to the guests who have been on the show, and welcome to any guests coming in the future. It's a fantastic opportunity to have this forum or this venue where we can bring topics to the discussion table and if nothing else, introduce new ideas to the audience and things that I have just had my mind blown by some of the things that I've come across in these conversations. I mean, Alan, I thought that I knew quite a bit about theological arguments and understanding of things before coming into the show. This would be my arrogant 27-year-old self who knows everything, of course. But I have just been blown away with all the different interpretations and introductions to ways of thinking that I've experienced on this show. And I've appreciated you as well as everybody else that's been part of it. I mean, Nick's theory of the universe or the multiverse as a deist god, wow, that is mind-blowing. It's been incredible. And the opportunity to have somebody like Eric Hovind on the show, who obviously is a established person in his circles and came on here knowing exactly what he wanted to talk about, and had a great conversation on that. It was just I don't know, it's been incredible for me. It's been a great experience.
I think it shows how each of us in the particular paths that we are in have followed a direction that for many of us evidently, even people who we all have relative degrees of to the degree to which we're seeking to be honest. Let's be honest. We're not always trying to be honest, even though we'd like to think we are. That it is interesting to see all the different paths that a person can be led down as a result of the things that they are discovering. Which I don't think that personally, it doesn't strike me as a danger. I think it strikes me as the beauty and the humility of a great deal that there is to be learned and understood, and how easy it is with how much there is to learn to be both well educated and have no clue where the balance is.
I have to agree. I mean, it's been a huge introduction.
Even
to
in academic circles, we're running into a problem where we have people who are truly well developed in a particular specialty, and yet they're still in other ways, as ignorant as can be. Some people, specialize in a particular area of sociology, a particular area of psychology, a particular area of philosophy, a particular area of computer science, and yet they can still be for the other party, But
it's made me doubt myself a bit, to be honest. It's been such a great opportunity, but to understand the way that people approach things, that I have to question: am I just as dogmatic as I've seen in other people, and is my approach to reasoning clouded in some ways?
I think we all are, Greg. To be honest with you, I think we all are. I remember one time doing a study on self-image where I was talking about the illusion that there's such a thing as a poor evaluation of ourselves. And by that, I don't mean that there aren't people who think badly of themselves, but that we all think highly of ourselves in certain ways. And many people who think badly of themselves, although they may think that they're inadequate to life, they are absolutely certain that they are correct in making that conclusion, and trying to suggest to them that they have come to this conclusion by being, bullied into it or abused into it. They hold on to that view of themselves, and there's a sense in which there's almost this arrogance of great ability in their conclusions of understanding themselves so powerfully well that there's that the difference here is whether or not it's like we all have a need to be certain about something, but are we applying that certainty in a way that is appropriate, balanced, and in the right area. But it's almost as if our personalities and our blood chemistry, we can't live without a certain degree of putting that somewhere. And based on our experience, if we can't put it in a sense of confidence in ourselves, we'll put it in a confidence in our conclusion that we are inadequate. So there's that weirdness of the fact that there's these dynamics in it. So I would wonder if all of us possess, in ways we don't understand, a certain dogmatic arrogance. And it's, for me, I think it's just better to be aware of that as a potential and as a possibility, and to grow comfortable with the recognition that I like what Dr. Jones talks about, avoiding these fixed beliefs. That, to me, that speaks volumes, because there's a certain sense in which we don't want to become indecisive. Sometimes timing is important for decisiveness, but at the same time, we don't want to be so beyond it that we can't really reconsider when it's appropriate.
I think that ties quite a bit into what Eric and actually Alan spoke about. They're both they have different understandings of the world and of the Bible. I think that is relatively evident. But they have very similar philosophical understandings of the world, which I found interesting. I didn't necessarily expect that coming into it. But I mean, when we were talking about that which is objective, what you were talking about with people believing that their assessment of themselves is at the very minimum accurate, even if
very negative,
justifiable having confidence in it. You're right. It's people trust themselves more than anything else. They trust their own observations, their own conclusions, obviously more than anybody else's. I've been told in the past, and this is one of my favorite accusations that's given to me, is that I always think I'm right. People will say, you always think you're right. Well, of course I do. I don't walk into a situation going, I'm wrong here. But I don't think
exactly.
there's anything wrong with that.
Exactly. And let's, I don't think that's actually a lack of humility necessarily. People have to be well-spoken. They need to be more deliberate. And I'll tell you that I think an example of when you gave that presentation, not on your show, but at the later hour, when you gave that presentation on evolution, I thought that was one of the most amazing exhibits of the fact that you are a person who has well prepared yourself, who has great reasons for thinking the way that you do, and has really covered a great deal of ground. And I need to commend you on that. I thought it was. I'm waiting to get a copy of that so I can look at it again, because I thought it was just thoroughly awesome. And in that, you couldn't have done that if you didn't have a certain confidence that you possess this ability to go do it, to think about it, to be critical, to evaluate, and to then somehow coherently bring it together into some sort of coherent narrative. And we need that. And I don't think that you did it in a manner where, if there were some other evidence that comes up that modifies some of these ideas or theories, that you would be somehow closed to the modification.
Well, thank you, first of all. You've got me blushing here. But beyond that, I agree that the approach that I try to take, and this actually ties into what I was just saying, is that, yes, I always think that I'm right, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. What I think people are trying to say when they make such an accusation is that I think I'm always right, which is, I'm flipping two words around here in the order of that sentence, and that is a significant difference. And that's where I think that you and I, as the agnostics of the group, that very much fall in line with our epistemological understanding of how things can be known. And that's I think really what everything boiled down to with our conversation with Eric, and some of it with Alan as well, that the question of what can be known, what can't be known. I thought it was intriguing when Eric brought up the how can you trust your own perception of things, or your own observation, your own reasoning. and said that that was being circular reasoning. I trust it because I don't trust it realistically was my answer, is that I know that mine is fallible, therefore I look for a consensus, but then that takes the assumption that the consensus is still trustworthy.
My view on that is perhaps somewhat unconventional. Some people say, "Oh, wait a minute, that's circular reasoning," and then this opposed response to that is, "Oh, I'm sorry, my bad. I'm not supposed to think circularly." I disagree. I think all thinking, if you're going to be really coherent, it somehow has to all tie together. The problem with circular thinking is not that it's circular, but how small the circle is. Does the circle include as much data as you can possibly incorporate into the circle, or are you circling the wagons and keeping the mischievous enemy thoughts out of the circle so that you can maintain this circularity that works real smooth, efficiently small, and all? So there's a sense there in which I find that to be at times a bogus accusation.
Well, you had brought that up during the show too, and I thought that was something that I wanted to launch into more with you in the future. So no better time than the present for that. I disagree.
Cool.
So this would be a great. We may end up focusing the rest of the show on this question alone, but I think that circular reasoning is reasoning that is self-justifying, and I know we talked a little bit during that show about axioms and postulates, or things that first principles, things that basically must be accepted for any reasoning to work. And this is something that I've thought significantly more about in the last few weeks, and it's really, I've chewed on it and milling over it. And one thing that I've recognized is that when Eric asked if it was possible for anything to be known, I instinctively answered no, because I, of course, tend to use the scientific definition of knowledge.
Right. Right.
And that, of course, was I think
I found that to be the bait and switch.
But I do believe that plenty of things can be known, especially things that are tautological. 2 + 2 = 4, because we have defined those words to mean those things. So yes, that is known. There is no way that 2 + 2 is not equal to 4, and it's the thing that I am using to broadcast this, or the program that I'm using, is called Skype, and I know that because that's the name of it.
It's not at all likely that you're mistaken about that. And not only that, but also there's this, I think that he went to the extreme area of combinations and permutations and statistics, in a sense. Although any one thing that could be modified or an error or something, what is the likelihood that absolutely everything that could turn out to be false? That is a radically different I think a good example of that would be this. What if I had this bucket raised up above a gym floor, 10 feet, and we're going to spill the bucket, and inside this bucket are 1,000 quarters numbered 0 through 999. Now, before we dump the bucket, I want you to write down the numbers 0 through 999, and I want you to tell me which ones will be heads and which ones will be tails. Now, there's not a single quarter there for which you can guarantee you will be absolutely correct. But the likelihood that you would be wrong more than 40% of the time is extremely unlikely. And of course, this is just something that is totally apparently random, or as Nick might think of it, as something that's more stochastic. It's just chaotic in a way we don't know. But the point being is this, that in all of our search for insight and wisdom, where we're attempting to apply appropriate ideas and thoughts and reason and logic, it is highly unlikely that we are wrong about everything. So the fact that that we can't nail any one specific thing down with a certain degree of certainty is not the same thing as determining the quality of the whole kit and caboodle in just one fell swoop. So I thought that was a little too extreme and simplistic myself.
I do tend to agree, and actually, it's much along those lines that I've been chewing on this so much, and that's where I look at your argument about all reasoning being circular, and we have a viewer comment here that axioms aren't anything more than a starting point for circular reasoning, and that's actually what I was meaning to get to as well. Is that
law of non-contradiction, I think is the way the circle is validated. And which is why I say it's the size of the circle that makes it inappropriate, not the fact that it is a circle. You can't continue on in a direction if something in the circuit comes back and says, "Oh, well, no, that doesn't fit," for some other reason.
I think that it actually works a little differently, though. Circular reasoning would be where the observations, the things that we look at come back to justifying the initial one.
Right. The Bible is true.
I agree with the viewer that
the Bible says it's true. The Bible is the Word of God. Therefore, the Bible is true. That kind of a circle.
Right, exactly. That is what I mean when I talk about circular reasoning.
Right. And if that's your definition of circular reasoning, then I would agree that all circular reasoning that fits that definition is absolutely incredulous. What I'm doing is I'm saying, let's not kid ourselves to think that just because the circle is beyond the horizon, that it isn't there. And so there's a sense in which I'm playing almost kind of like a philosophical game with the argument, because there's a sense in which our sense of coherence, the lack of dissonance in how we're thinking, indicates that in ways we're not even aware of, it has all knitted together. And so that's really what I mean by it. So it's really just kind of. By the way, your volume is low enough that I can't hear you that clearly. Joe, if you could turn up the send to me of Greg, I could hear him a little better. Thank you. But that's what I'm really meaning by it. I'm just talking about when you stop to think about it and kind of add it up. And by the way, I'm not really certain about that.
Right? Are you certain of that? I disagree that the term can be used in the same way. I guess is really what I'm getting at. Is yes, I agree that all reasoning is in some way, shape, or form based upon an axiom or a postulate that must be accepted. But I think that circular reasoning is when the axiom it's supported by the conclusions that are drawn from it. Whereas
you start somewhere that is not axiomatic yes. If you start somewhere that is not really axiomatic,
instead of circular
and then work your way
reasoning
around,
as a web
not going to work.
Oh, yeah. Are we? So I look at things. I mean, everybody's seen an orb weaving spider web, and realistically, a spider can weave a web with 3, 4, 5 different anchor points that can be huge. It can be enormous across an entire room, and it touches the wall over here, over there, and it hits the floor there. And then it can make this incredible, elaborate web. And that entire web can come collapsing down if you remove just 2 of these anchor points, or sometimes even just one of them, depending on how they're anchored. And that's what I see as the axioms. Those are not part of the reasoning when you look at – they're not part of a circle. They're anchor points outside of it. There's no way to take the reasoning based on these axioms to then justify the axioms, which is why they are axioms. They have to be accepted as true.
I totally agree with you that even though during the show you mentioned about how axioms can only be must be limited to those things that unless we agree they're true, there's just nothing we can discuss or deal with in any manner. And this is I think a real requirement of an axiom, that it be in every way necessary. Or we can't even discuss.
Accuse me of being utilitarian for making that argument in the past. That it breaks down because I'm saying that the only reason that we can justify. We have a comedian in the audience today, by the way. If you see chuckles, I'm getting comments coming through, but I've lost my train of thought. This one, I've heard that
you're talking about
axioms
being
great cologne for
utilitarian and being
attracting the
criticized for being
ladies.
utilitarian. And,
That's right. Yeah, that people have accused me of being utilitarian in that, and I think that's the only way that we can be when it comes down to an axiom. That if you're willing to accept an axiom that is not utilitarian, that is not absolutely necessary, then you've become arbitrary, and that kind of axiomatic reasoning can be used for any axiom from that point forward.
right.
If there's not
And I would argue that I would just want to modify that for myself personally, that when it comes to the axiom being absolutely necessary, that is absolutely necessary to the topic at hand.
I can agree with that as well. I think, but yeah, it's something that when I've had conversations with, say, well, we'll use Eric again. We talked about the axiom that was right from the university that he went to, or the college, or I forget the title of this school he went to, that said the very first axiom was that God is the creator of all things and is the source of the Bible.
Yeah.
I'm paraphrasing.
I can't accept that as an axiom myself, even though I am, a believer. It strikes me as even more foundational. That is that there is what is. It's there.
Right. Well, and that's my argument on the axioms is when I speak with people like Eric, we are obviously accepting a core set of axioms that all of us accept. Mm-hmm. The universe exists. We exist. Right. You and I are true individuals. It's entirely possible that we're computer simulations, or that in some way, shape, or form we don't truly exist,
or that we're connected in ways we don't know, that is not individuated. That's possible too.
That's
it makes me wonder this. Here's when I try to understand it. How can an intelligent person somehow be thinking differently? I don't want to accept the idea that it's because, well, they're just not intelligent. But if we go back into the Dark Ages, if we go back further and further and further, I think that you can see, even in science, that some of the early ideas, some of the early notions that were based upon observations that were being made then were really in kind of an infantile state. They were based upon observations being made from the context in which they were in, and that's the beauty of the scientific method, that over time we acquire more and more that we can nail down to the ground, until finally today, here in the year 2012, we have so much that is nailed down to the ground that we can work with, that now when we're making observations, we're making them in light of all these things we've nailed down to the ground. But what happens if we live as if everything that's been discovered and understood since in the last 2,000 years is totally incredulous, false, or we don't know about it, or it doesn't matter, and we're going to work with a frame of mind that's 2,000 years old?
I absolutely agree. I think that that knowledge is something that builds on itself, and that science most certainly does. There was a discussion I was in on a Facebook group just earlier today, where Alan Darley had asked the question, made the statement that Aristotle was one of the greatest thinkers of all time, and I absolutely agree. Don't get me wrong; Aristotle is incredibly admirable for his contributions to the intellectual world, but we need to understand that Aristotle lived 300 years before BC, or almost 400 years BC. This was a person who was living in a world where the known elements were earth, air, fire, and water. And
Exactly. Did you see my comment on that? What he had to say?
I have not seen the response on that yet, so I look forward to it. Anybody who would like, but again, you are all welcome to find me on Facebook, and we have discussion groups. We have things that go on throughout the week, and we're very involved. Bob and I both. If you find me on Facebook and send me a message, let me know you'd like to be part of the group. We would love to have more. It's just more interesting things to discuss on the show. So thank you, Alan, again, for continuing these conversations after the show. I did want to say we have another viewer comment here, a question. It says, what makes the axioms of science any more valid than the axioms of religion? And um, do you mind if I
Go
take
ahead.
this one for a moment, and I'll let you cover it next? But
Sure.
um, my defense of that assumption or that assertion that the axioms of science are more valid than the axioms of religion is that again it's a utilitarian argument. It boils down to how incredibly useful they are. The many of them are actually one and the same. Religion obviously has to assume that the earth or that existence exists and is real. It has to assume that the universe is there. Has to assume that logic is works in the way that it does. So these are axioms that are absolutely necessary. That the universe is consistent. Well, I guess religion actually makes an exemption to that particular axiom that the universe is consistent because it allows for miracles, which would be defined, generally speaking, as the suspension of the consistency of the universe or the change in something not to be expected by the deterministic laws of the universe. So my argument there is that the axiom of science are more valid or more solid, at least, than the axioms of religion because they have garnered so much incredible use. Because we have developed everything that we have from science, and it's every time that something new is developed or discovered or created or inspired by science, it's dependent upon these axioms entirely. So the fact that we're having this show broadcast on the internet using computers and optical cameras and fiber optic cables, these are every single one of these is evidence that the axioms of science are very, very valid. And I just don't see the same kind of use or function from axioms of religion. I guess if the viewer would like to comment again and say anything that they specifically think of as an axiom of religion, please do. But what is your take on that?
Well, first of all, I think that sometimes religion has this false notion that we have to somehow lift God up incredibly high and knock man down incredibly low in order to really emphasize this contrast. And in a similar manner, I think that sometimes religious axioms have this need to want to somehow make them superior. And this is oftentimes the accusation. I would want to say that I can completely agree with you about the usefulness of the scientific axioms, and I wouldn't want to think about religious axioms in any manner that in any way detracted from their reliability, their credibility, or their usefulness. But I would say this, that I think that scientific axioms are limited to only such things as can fit into the formula E equals mc squared. If it deals with energy, if it deals with mass, if it deals with these aspects of reality, then we are we're in the domain of science. And like if someone were to bring to me a coin from say there was a coin that was put out in I can't remember where it was. There was a coin dedicated to the use of renewable energy, and on this coin is a image of the Earth. And it's, whose name and superscription on this coin? I would say, well, render to science the things that are science, and to gods the things that are gods. And I think that our basic definition of no matter what religion you're talking about, there's this sense in which the divine is something other than the physical universe. And there's a sense in which I think that religionists oftentimes want to bring that otherness into the E equals mc squared rendition in a way that somehow nullifies it. And I think that's a fatal error. And so that I really think that the domain of religion and its axioms have to remain in the domain of this mysterious otherness, and it's therefore its utilitarian and its usefulness is only in that otherness as well. So
you think them purely philosophical pursuits?
Well, aren't we all philosophical? Philosophy is really just a big word we use to mean nothing other than making sense of things, and we all have to, in order to function, come to some coherent sense that makes sense of things, and there are some questions that are really beyond science. That doesn't mean that the answers we come up with are valid necessarily. But what I'm saying is that there's this other domain. And unfortunately, when it comes to religion, the domain that belongs to religion is a domain in which people like the Apostle Paul admit, right now we see through a glass darkly. We do not possess the sort of access to that we do have to the universe. And so there's a sense in which we're in the age of science, and appropriately so. And so I would say that these we can be far more certain of these things, and that these things are far more useful in many ways. And that when we try, in fact, I think a great deal of the evil that comes out of religion is when it tries to somehow reign superior over all these other things instead of coexisting with it. The arguments that religion has had with science over the years are, in my opinion, just absolute foolishness. Science hasn't always been right, but science corrects itself.
I agree. We have another couple viewer comments. One of them is that miracles aren't things that break the laws of the universe. They are just things that can't be explained by scientific laws that we've observed so far. And I would tend to agree that if there's something that appears to be a miracle in any way, there's a quote, I forget who it was that said it, but this is not my original statement. No, I'll go as far as that.
The word miracle is a linguistic construct of artificial synthesis, and you can understand, when something happens that's inexplicable. There are many things that are so-called miracles that science has explained. They're still amazing,
That's true. The quote specifically is that any sufficiently advanced technology is indiscernible from magic. If I were to take my Android phone and walk into a hidden tribal culture that has had no access to other human technology in any way,
you are a god of light.
There's a good chance. I mean, these Aboriginal people would likely see me looking very different from them and speaking and acting very differently. And then I have a magic device that I can use to I can speak to people across the planet. I can take images of it's magic, according to them. And I can't fault that reasoning. Any sufficiently advanced technology is.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Something that makes me think of is this. There's some of us who have some gray matter up there and can think. There's some people who study obtuse fields and obtuse ideas because it helps maintain this godlike command in front of other people, and we certainly live in a day when think about it. When we had Nick on, he is talking about a level of theoretical physics that most people had no clue even exists. Nick was a very bright guy, but I think that sometimes when you're talking to somebody like that, the feeling of just how bright this person is sometimes overwhelming and almost godlike. You know what I'm saying?
I absolutely agree. I think that I know when Nick and I'm going to go on record here in what is probably a very arrogant statement, but I believe myself to be very, very intelligent. And when I had my first conversation with Nick, I did not feel that way. It was he's explaining things to me that I was going, what? Can we go back over that? And you're right. I mean, there comes a point
if you were talking biology though with him, I mean, the reverse would be true. Well,
he does.
We live in a day where theoretical physicists are the gods of science. They are. They're the rock stars.
That's true. They get all the fun new things and the crazy.
They get all the chicks
on Newsweek. Right, exactly. That anybody who's seen The Big Bang Theory knows that's true. But there are a few more viewer comments. The next one is, if religion is true and science is true, then they can't contradict each other, and there must be a way that they both agree. And I think that's
totally
profound. That's absolutely true. And I actually wanted to say, I forgot to mention this during the evolution talk I did last weekend. But there, a lot of people from a large variety of religious backgrounds don't actually know that people within the structure of their church have made similar statements and have agreed. Right. For example, Pope John Paul II, in a letter or a press release of some sort entitled "Truth Cannot Contradict Truth," in, I believe it was 2001, the Pontifical Academy of the Sciences did a thorough survey and critique of the theory of evolution. And at the end, they said there is absolutely nothing wrong with this. This is completely sound science, and it must be true if any science is true. This is the official position of the Roman Catholic Church.
At least the official position of the Pope, yeah, which is pretty significant, unless he was speaking. What do they call that? When he's speaking, there's a particular. They make a distinction when the Pope speaks. He's sometimes speaking
infallibility. I don't know exactly.
Ex officio or something. I know it's not. There's some. I can't remember. It's been a while since I've looked at it. But
yeah, there's a Latin term for it, but I know it's considered an infallibility of the Pope. They can be direct words inspired by the Holy Spirit and considered to be revelation.
Right. But only when he declares it as such or something like that. But anyway, there are many people in many different. There are even some people who are closet evolutionists who are in the midst of the fundamentalist movement, but they're basically laying low because they can't survive in their faith that they still maintain. They just haven't worked out how the conundrum works, and they're kind of hiding out, but they're there. I actually spoke to a person today in the mall. I was there shopping. Part of the frustrating weekend I've had, we're trying to get some drapes up. Everything's going wrong with this. But speaking to somebody who attending a church that's very fundamentalist, but totally acknowledges evolution and just says, look, I don't care about the problems there. I just, I'm there. So they're all over the place. They really are.
I hope it becomes more and more prevalent. That's because, again, my opinion and the opinion of the scientific community is that evolution is science, and if you accept any part of science to be true, you're making a rather arbitrary distinction if you say everything except evolution. If you trust science to do anything, then you have to trust the processes that it goes through, and the processes that it goes through are the ones that have come to this. So unless you have a critique using those very same processes, it's a rather arbitrary distinction.
Well, I have some encouraging news for you. It took the church, both Catholic and Protestant, 150 years to admit that Copernicus was right. So we're right on schedule.
Right. Congratulations.
So that's encouraging, I hope.
That is. It'd be a little bit more encouraging had they upped the scale a little bit, had it gone maybe 135 years. Hey, is that too much to ask, a 3% increase? Or that's more than 3%. Either way. We do have another topic or another question here that I think it's going back a little bit from where we have forayed into, but brings us back to the idea of axioms. And there's a viewer comment that asks, are there assumptions that are healthy for discussion and some that aren't? I think that's an intriguing question.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly.
I think when it comes to discussion, I think that, anything can be offered. And I think that, even in the process of science, there have been some axioms that have been offered that were determined to be unqualified after a while, and others that then came to sometimes it takes a while to get down to the bottom of it. But, for discussion, I can't. Who's going to be the discussion police? Well,
and I wanted to go a step further. That I think that there's no axiom that cannot be accepted for the sake of discussion, for the sake of argument, or for the sake of a thought experiment, an intellectual foray into the unknown. I I study the Bible on a weekly basis with one of my, well, it's been spotty lately, but frequently with one of my very good friends who is a Jehovah's Witness. And while I do this, I, I don't suspend my skepticism, but we discuss it under the assumption that the Bible is indeed the Word of God, and we discuss the Bible through that framework. And I think that makes for some really interesting conversations. We've had questions that are conversations that are very theological in nature and that are fantastic thought experiments. If the Bible truly is the Word of God, what implications can be drawn from it, particularly from the New World Translation that the Jehovah's Witnesses use? And it's fascinating for me. I think that that's one of the most useful things that people can do in conversation is step outside of your comfort zone to make assumptions. That's I think the biggest area that people fear in conversations is they're so comfortable with the assumptions that they have and so confident in them that it's scary for them to set those aside for a moment and look and accept a completely different paradigm and think about the world and it's, to me, just an exciting thing to do, and it brings about a whole new world of conversations that's not possible unless I suspend the worldview that I originally come from. So,
I've often talked about something that I call multi-axial thinking, and it's exactly that sort of thing. That when we've come to a coherent view of something, there's always the possibility that reality has to be so reduced for us to understand it, that it's possible that what we're looking at is really the equivalent of an optical illusion. It's good to look for other potentially coherent, even if we can't agree with them, ways of putting it together and at least appreciating. We talk about some of the ancient people, Socrates, who had said, it is a sign of intelligence to be able to really entertain a notion that you don't agree with. And I think there's a lot to be gained by. Sometimes it'll modify what you think. Sometimes it'll actually create a hybrid insight. And so it's always good to look at things from a variety of angles, even if one is going to end up not really trusting in some of those angles, at least to consider it. Love everything for 15 minutes.
I absolutely agree, and I think that's my homework for the viewers for this week is if you are a theist, I want you, and yes, I'm talking to you, to try at some point to consider consider the things that you've read about the Bible, or within the Bible, or any particular discussion from a completely different angle. Now, I don't necessarily mean assume you're an atheist and come at it from this assumption that there is no God, but try thinking about it from the assumption that if you're Catholic, think that maybe Martin Luther was right, or come at it from the different. I mean, this is something I wanted to talk about earlier. Stephen Prothero is an author that I find absolutely fascinating. I have two of his books here. One of them is Religious Literacy: What Every American Needs to Know and Doesn't. And the other one is God Is Not One. I don't have the fancy cover. That one's downstairs. But the subtitle of that is The 8 Rival Religions That Run the World and Why Their Differences Matter. And this, I think, I wanted to touch on earlier. We only have another minute or two left for the show, but I wanted to touch on it earlier when somebody talked about the axioms of religion and their validity versus the axioms of science. Part of the reason that I asked if they wanted to clarify is because the axioms of religion are not consistent. That this book very specifically, the God Is Not One, goes into the axioms of religion and how they differ from one another. For example, in Christianity, suffering is character building. It's emboldening. It's part of the experience of life.
Not all Christianity, but
right.
Yeah.
It's certain, particularly traditional Orthodox Christianity, Roman Catholicism, and Lutherans, some of the other Protestant branches. But from Buddhism, reality is something to be escaped. It's something to be overcome. Or I'm sorry, not reality. Suffering. And nirvana is the detachment of yourself, and it's the oneness with nature. Whereas in Christianity or in traditional monotheistic religions, it's infinite individualism, where you live on forever as yourself.
Right.
Whereas
they definitely take a totally different view of the role of suffering.
And even Christian Science, which is sort of the Western form of Buddhism from Mary Baker Eddy, is coming about it from the angle that it's an illusion, that suffering doesn't even truly exist, and it can be overcome through meditation and prayer. So I'm being told by our producer that we are running out of time. By running out, he just put 0 minutes left. So we are out of time for today, and I know that there's hours and hours and hours we could talk about this more. But this is something I really do mean. This show, we want it to be inspiring, hence half of the name. And I would really like it if every viewer of this show tried to do the thought experiment, that they're coming from a different angle this week. And I'm going to do the same thing. I just made a date with my Jehovah's Witness friend. This Tuesday, we will be doing a conversation again and studying the Bible once again. And I will be stepping outside of my atheist shoes and looking at the world from the eyes of a Jehovah's Witness. So I look forward to that experience, and I look forward to next week when we will be joined by Mike Shaw, again a biologist, talking about some of the most interesting organisms on the planet, and what that might say about the origins of life even. So thank you for joining us. This has been Inspiring Honesty. Bob, thank you for having us, and I will talk to you again next week.
See you then.